Everyone to our public hearing here, September 20th, Council Chambers. Welcome, and we will call this meeting to order and need to start with the roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Yes, Mayor Robertson is in the chair. Councillor Louis is on leave of absence. Councillor Stevenson. Here. Councillor Deal. Councillor Jang is not in the chamber. Councillor Reimer, not in the chamber. Councillor Meigs. Councillor Ball. Councillor Carr. Councillor Affleck. And Councillor DeGenova. You have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Clerk, and again, welcome everyone. Just before we start, just clarify on the Committee of the Whole front, as we've been doing for a number of public hearings now. I just want to remind Council, earlier in the year, the City Clerk advised us that it's not necessary for Council to sit as Committee of the Whole during a public hearing. However, in order to comply with the procedure bylaw, she recommends a motion to go into the Committee of the Whole. That is put to a vote and failed by Council, just so we've done that procedure. So I'll ask someone to make that motion to go into committee. Councillor Stevenson, Councillor Deal will second. And all those in favor? And those opposed? And the opposed carried. The motion has failed, as has happened in a number of these meetings now. So we are not in committee. We sit as council, which means any motions arising need to be seconded. That's the technical bit that we've been starting our public hearings with for some months now. With that, we will we'll dive into tonight's agenda. We have 3 items on the agenda tonight, and we have, at this point, no speakers registered for the first 2 items. We have 4 people registered to speak to the 3rd item, so we should be able to hear from people who are here tonight and finish the agenda tonight. If somehow we don't complete the agenda tonight, hearing from all speakers, we would reconvene this meeting Thursday, the 22nd at 6 p.m. here in Council Chamber. But I do expect, as I said, given the number of speakers registered, that we will be able to complete the items tonight. I'll just go through the basics for those speaking here in Council at a public hearing. Speakers have 5 minutes to make their comments, and their comments should be focused on the merits of the report that's being considered by Council here. We ask that speakers state whether they support or oppose the recommendations in the report. Speakers may speak only once. If you have further comments beyond those 5 minutes, you can put them in writing and either hand them to the clerk here or email them to mayor&council@vancouver.ca. And if you are speaking on behalf of 3 or more people or 3 organizations, you get 3 extra minutes. So you get 8 minutes to speak. We just ask you identify people you're speaking for or organizations that you are speaking for who are here but not speaking. And you don't have to use all of your 5 minutes. There's a timer on the podium there, and I will give you a heads up as you approach the 5-minute limit. You may have questions from councillors after you finish your remarks, and that will be additional time for you. You don't have to answer the questions, but you may get them from council. So with that, we are ready to dive into the first item, and that is item number 1, the text amendment, miscellaneous text amendments for 4162 and 4188 Cambie Street, 2290 Main Street, and 7299 Granville Street, and 188 East 1st Avenue. So I'll ask our clerks to read the application and the summary of correspondence received.
This is an application by the Acting General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to make amendments to the CD1 number 628 bylaw for 4162 and 4188 Cambie Street, CD1 number 575 bylaw for 2290 Main Street, CD1 number 521 bylaw for 7299 Granville Street, Shannon Muse, formerly known as 7101 to 7201 Granville Street, and CD1 number 478 bylaw for 188 East 1st Avenue, which is 1721 Main Street. The amendments would achieve the intent of the initial rezoning approvals and correct inadvertent errors. The Acting General Manager, Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability recommends approval, and since referral to public hearing, Council has not received any correspondence on this application.
Thanks, Madam Clerk. And we have Fiona McDougall here, who's our planning analyst for Vancouver South Division, to present the application. We don't have any speakers registered, so typically we waive the presentation without speakers. If everyone's okay with that. Okay, we're good with no presentation. But you're here to answer questions. Okay, so we will first see if there are council questions for staff on this before we hear from members of the public. Any questions, council? Seeing none, we'll move on to seeing if there are speakers for this. There are no registered speakers, so I'll call 3 times in case there are people here. Are there any speakers for item number 1? Are there any speakers here for item number 1? Last call. Any speakers here for item number 1? Seeing none, we will, any closing comments from staff? No closing comments. Any final questions for council to staff on the text amendments? Okay, we're ready for that motion. Councillor Deal will move recommendations. I need a seconder for that. Councillor Jang. And anyone want to speak to the motion moved by Councillor Deal? No takers. We'll go to the voting screen. Council can vote on the recommendations. Okay, we're just processing the votes here. Councillor Reimer's computer is not working. Yeah, Madam Clerk, did you see Councillor Reimer's assist, please? Okay, we're in 10 votes in favor, unanimous support for the motion, moving the recommendations. And that is item number 1 concluded. Thanks to staff for the work on it. Much appreciated. And we're on to item number 2, which is a text amendment 2016 inflationary rate adjustments to development cost levies, DCLs, density bonus contributions, and community amenity contribution CAC targets. Madam Clerk, can you please read the application and the summary of correspondence received?
Yes, this is an application by the Acting General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to amend the Zoning and Development Bylaw to implement inflationary adjustments to the density bonus contributions by increasing the values of the affordable housing shares and the amenity shares in the RM8 and RM8N district schedules and in the RM9, RM9A, RM9N, and RM9AN district schedule. The Acting General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability recommends approval, and since referral to public hearing, Council has not received any correspondence on this application.
Okay, thanks, Madam Clerk. And we have Chris Klibben here, or we have Randy Pekarski here from Planning to present the application. No presentation needed, given we don't have speakers registered, but you're here for questions. Council's fine with that. Are there any questions from council to staff on item number 2? No questions. Okay, we'll go right to seeing if there's any speakers here tonight. Any speakers here for item number 2? Are there any speakers here for item number 2? Last call, speakers for number 2. No speakers, so we will close the speakers list, and as we've had very few public comments on this, close the public comments and move to any closing comments from staff. None necessary. Sorry, I just called for speakers. Sir, sir, this is about, okay, okay. All right, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Okay, any closing comments or questions from council? Any council member wishing to make a motion? Councillor Carr, you will move? Councillor Carr will move the recommendations in the report, and we need a seconder for that. Councillor Deal. Any speakers to that motion, moving the recommendations? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote. Is your system working now? There we go. Okay. Okay, we have 10 votes all in favor of the motion on item number 2, which means unanimous support, and we have concluded item number 2 now. We're on to our third and final item, and I believe that's why most people are here tonight, other than staff, and thanks staff for the work on item number 2 there, all those text amendments. We're on to item number 3, the rezoning. That's Joyce-Collingwood Station Precinct Plan and related rezonings. Madam Clerk, can you please read the application and the summary of correspondence received? Oh, Councillor DeGenova, my apologies.
I've spoken to the mayor a little bit earlier. I am going to declare a conflict of interest in this situation, as I have an immediate family member that is working with a developer that may have and is likely to have confirmed an interest in a possible rezoning in the plan. So I will be leaving at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for declaring that conflict, and enjoy the rest of your evening. So, Madam Clerk, can you please read the application summary of correspondence received?
This is an application by the Acting General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to amend the Zoning and Development Bylaw to add 2 new districts proposed by the Joyce-Collingwood Station Precinct Plan. Accordingly, some properties within the plan area would be rezoned to RM7AN to allow for duplexes and townhouses, and to RM9BN to allow for apartments. These zoning changes would help implement the plan by allowing for more housing in close proximity to rapid transit. The Acting General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability recommends approval, subject to the conditions set out in the summary and recommendation of the public hearing agenda. Since referral to public hearing, Council has received 4 pieces of correspondence in support, 10 pieces in opposition, and 1 piece in the other category. This represents all correspondence received up to approximately 5 p.m. today.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We have Joyce Uyasugi here, planner for Vancouver's Midtown Division, to present the application. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This presentation provides an overview of the city-initiated zoning amendments proposed in the Joyce-Collingwood Station Precinct Plan, as outlined in the staff report on the plan and related rezonings. On June 28th of this year, Council approved the Joyce-Collingwood Station Precinct Plan, or JC Precinct Plan. The plan aims to create more compact, mixed-use development around the SkyTrain station, increase neighborhood connectivity, and create vibrant streets. Subject to Council approval of the plan, as part of plan implementation, key recommendations in the staff report were to amend the Zoning and Development Bylaw to create new zoning and to rezone certain areas within the JC precinct from single-family to duplex, townhouse, and apartment zoning. The JC Precinct is located within the Renfrew-Collingwood community in a compact area around the SkyTrain station. The focus of this presentation is primarily the transition areas shown in yellow outline, which are the subject of the city-initiated rezoning. The rest of the area within the JC Precinct would redevelop through applicant-initiated site-specific rezonings over a 25-year period. This slide shows a massing illustration of the JC Precinct plan area at future build-out. The JC Precinct will be predominantly a residential area with some increase in local shops and services along Joyce Street. A range of building types and housing tenures is envisioned, from duplexes and townhouses to apartments and tower forms, and social, rental, and market housing. The intent of the proposed zoning changes is to enable buildings that transition between taller forms close to the station, shown in gray, and lower forms in the residential areas behind, shown in white. Specifically, the new zoning is proposed to allow duplexes and townhouses in the areas shown in blue, and 4-story apartments in the areas shown in purple. A total of about 115 lots would be affected. Similar to other areas of the city where city-initiated rezonings are part of plan implementation, the proposed zoning amendments will streamline the development application process and make the development process more efficient. This will allow for the delivery of diverse housing choices at different affordability levels in Joyce-Collingwood. As in any district schedule, requirements including height, density, frontage, and setbacks are set out in the new zones. This slide shows some of the regulations in the proposed district schedules. The new zones would retain the development rights in the existing RS1 zoning. Single-family uses can continue, and new single-family development, including secondary suites and laneway houses, would be permitted. The accompanying guidelines being proposed set out design direction for the different building types envisioned in the new zones, with an emphasis on neighborliness and livability. This slide shows a few illustrations of the building types that may be considered, including stacked townhouses, courtyard row houses, and apartments. As part of the public consultation on the development of the JC Precinct Plan, staff sought input on the suitability of the proposed forms and locations. In addition, notification of the proposed amendments was sent to all affected property owners, and an open house was held in April 2016 specific to the proposed amendments. It was generally felt that the proposed zoning amendments meet the intent of the JC Precinct Plan. Attendees felt that duplexes, townhouses, and apartments will contribute to housing diversity in the neighborhood, and that they would provide a good transition from taller buildings closer to the station. Similar to recent zoning amendments in the Norquay and Marpole communities, the provisions in the RM9BN district schedule for apartments will include a density bonusing mechanism, which will contribute toward the delivery of amenities as identified in the JC Precinct Public Benefits Strategy. Further, the proposed new zones will both be subject to enhanced acoustical noise requirements to address regular noise events from the SkyTrain. Staff are undertaking work to amend the acoustical requirements in the zoning and development bylaw to reflect higher performance measures that will reduce interior noise levels in all new residential development impacted by continuous or regular individual noise events. The updated acoustic requirements are expected to be presented to Council in the first quarter of 2017. In summary, now that Council has approved the Joyce-Collingwood Station Precinct Plan, this report recommends that the Zoning and Development Bylaw be amended to create new districts, RM7AN and RM9BN, and that certain properties within the JC Precinct be rezoned to these districts to allow for duplex, townhouse, and apartment development. This concludes my presentation. Staff are available to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from council for staff before we go to hearing from members of the public? And seeing none, thanks for the presentation, and we will go to our speakers list. So we have, as I said, actually we have 5 speakers registered right now, and the first speaker is our MLA for Vancouver Kingsway, Mr. Adrian Dix. Welcome.
Your Worship and members of Council. This is, as has been described, the implementation of the Joyce Station Precinct Plan implemented on, passed by Council on June 28th, presented. There's a public hearing on June 14th. There's a significant intervening event between those 2 dates, and that was the announcement of the school closure list, which directly affects the rezonings we're talking about today and directly affects this area. All of the rezonings we're talking about today, and we're talking about rezonings that have been presented as family rezonings. I think they are. I think that's fair to say from the description provided. The duplex townhouse zone is described, its intent is described as providing more affordable ground-oriented housing options for families. Equally, the 4-story apartment zone, which will also be dealt with in the hearing tonight, is intended to provide units suitable for families. The 2 closest schools to the Joyce Station plan, the 2 schools most affected by it at an elementary level, Graham Bruce School and Carleton School, are both on a proposed closure list. A proposed closure list that's supported by the suggestion that in spite of the increase of 2,300 housing units presented as the estimate as a result of the Joyce Station plan, and a further 1,058 units that are currently going up at the Wall Center Central Park, that the number of children in the area will decline. Further, this suggestion is made, and it's in page 21 of the report on Graham Bruce School, is made based on, it's suggested in the report, quarterly meetings of the City of Vancouver. So on the one hand, we have a proposal that was presented and supported by Council based on supporting the family character of a neighborhood, and we have a secondary process which suggests that there will be a decline in the number of children. Both of those things can't be true, and we need your help. This particular plan, I think, clearly demonstrates a desire for family housing and will clearly bring more children to the neighborhood. We believe as well that the towers will do so as well. I've commissioned a report from Urban Futures, which will be known to City Council, addressing specifically the Wall Center Central Park and the West Bank proposal at 5050 Joyce, which shows more than 100 school-age children. Not thousands of school-age children, but for 1,200 new homes, 100 school-age children that will come just in those projects alone. And when you add these projects in, clearly there will be significantly more children. So we have a proposal that will yield 100% capacity in local schools in advance of these development changes, 100% capacity, and that will eliminate dozens of childcare spaces in a neighborhood, just as you're bringing more family housing into a neighborhood. So what we need are 2 things, it seems to me. Support from Council. I know you addressed this issue in a general sense earlier, but I'm asking for it in a specific sense to avoid the closure of Graham Bruce School, which is completely inconsistent, and Carleton School, both completely inconsistent with the Joyce Station precinct plan. And for Council to direct or work with staff, or staff to work with the school board colleagues to bring information with respect to the Joyce precinct plan, specific information with its impact on population and children, to the Vancouver School Board in advance of its decision-making meeting next Monday. These are important questions and critical questions for us. The community, since you passed this plan, has held numerous meetings to discuss issues around amenities on 5050 Joyce and community issues. This is going to be a challenge for the neighborhood. It's already a challenge in terms of traffic. The development at the Wall Center has significantly increased traffic on Joyce Street. It's a big challenge for the neighborhood. And I think we're trying to address this challenge together. But the idea that you would increase density by tripling the number of homes in a small area, then closing the 2 local schools is simply unacceptable and inconsistent with good public policy and the evidence. And we'd ask Council, as it deals with this plan today, if it chooses indeed to proceed with this plan today, as I suspect it will, because it's already passed the plan in principle, that Council act consistent with that and support Graham Bruce and Carleton School. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dix. And we've got a couple councillors with questions, starting with Councillor Meggs.
Thanks, Mr. Dix. And we sometimes hear of the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. In this case, we know what they're doing, and we don't like it a bit, based on all the analysis that's gone into supporting staff's proposal here. But I wonder if your study looked a little deeper. I think of my own neighborhood where when we moved in, our kids were school age, and they grew up and they went away and they moved to school, and there were no kids on the block for a period of time. And now we see another cohort coming through as families move on and seniors move out and that kind of thing. Is it your view that there may be a similar cycle at play here in Collingwood, that in addition to the new construction, there's been a natural evolution in the sense that school-age kids who moved there, say, 15 years ago are now in college, university, and about to be replaced by newcomers?
I think one of the challenges in Joyce-Collingwood, as someone who lives there, I live on Crowley Drive, I work on Joyce Street, these are my neighbors. One of the challenges has been, and I think Council has taken very specific action to address that in recent months, is the lack of three-bedroom apartments in our community. I think it's fair to say, because I've canvassed it pretty extensively, that for all of the development in the Joyce-Collingwood area in the past, and even in the recent past, there are no or almost no three-bedroom units. And that's changing. It's changing because Council across the board supported a change to ensure 10% three bedrooms, 25% two bedrooms. And it's one of the things we've worked on most closely, which is with Westbank, for example, the community, the Graham Bruce PAC, for example, working with Westbank to convince them to bring more three-bedroom units. And I think at least tentatively they're proposing 20% three-bedroom units at 50/50 Joyce. So part of the problem are these demographic evolutions, and those get addressed. And this study is based on recent census data in the neighborhood and is relevant to the neighborhood. But it also requires policy changes. Obviously, a major investment in social housing, and that's part of the Joyce Precinct plan that will give some opportunities, because I think the phenomenon that you're talking about is particularly evident in co-ops, where people have lost the subsidy and there are fewer family members in co-ops, and there are a lot of co-op units in Renfrew-Collingwood, and that's had a significant effect. But we have to take action, right? And that's, I think, been one of the key community initiatives as part of this Joyce Precinct plan, was at every stage, at every meeting, at every presentation, and all the work we've done with Ms. Huber and other members of staff, is to emphasize the importance of family housing and giving people the opportunity to live in Joyce-Collingwood and support the schools. And this was directly connected with the difficulty of proposed school closures at Carleton and Bruce in 2010. So we didn't sit on our hands. We said we need to provide opportunity for more children to live in our neighborhood. We've taken those steps. It's happening. And we now need to support that by supporting the schools.
So, I mean, we're not regrettably in some respects at a school board meeting tonight, but I'm also curious about the city objectives to achieve walkable, livable neighborhoods, to which pedestrian access to a school is fundamental. What's your assessment of what such closures would do in terms of the ability of people to walk to the so-called alternative schools or whatever alternative plan they have? Does it undermine those objectives or support them?
Well, essentially, the whole neighborhood is the Graham Bruce, Grenfell, and Carleton catchments, and 2 of those schools will close. Currently, at those schools, or at least as of June last year, there was, of course, a fire at Carleton in one of the buildings. There are 500 students at those schools. So currently, there's a lot of students, and there's more to come. And so what we're talking about is taking really the heart out of that neighborhood, meaning that the people living in that neighborhood will be dispersed in terms of their schools. And schools are a key linking part of the neighborhood. This is absolutely true. There's also the suggestion, the Graham Bruce School in a neighborhood which has a significant traffic problem. I mean, nobody, I think, is suggesting, even though it was the #1 priority at every meeting I've ever been to in Joyce-Collingwood, to end the truck route on Joyce Street. But it's a pretty significant thing. If you go there today, as we did at 9 o'clock this morning, the people were lined up 5 blocks back. And that's before any of the development being proposed by Joyce Street itself is in place. So yes, I think the ability to walk to school is a significant one. And if you go to Carleton School, which has a majority English language learners in its student population, where students are frequently brought to school by parents and walk to school with parents and grandparents. The decision to close that school and to have people go from the neighborhood to 37th and Nanaimo, which would be the replacement school at Cunningham, I think would dramatically change the nature of that school and the nature of the community. So this is vital. Saving these schools is about the Joyce Precinct Plan. Its initiatives cannot be achieved without it, and that's why we're asking Council and the City of Vancouver to make its voice heard, as they did earlier today on the politics of the question, but also on the details of it. Right. Because there are more children coming because of these decisions, and we need to reflect that in school board decisions.
Thanks for coming tonight.
Okay, Councillor Reimer, questions?
Yeah, I think Councillor Meggs covered it off a lot. I was sort of at a granular level kind of interested in the observed impact of the Carleton. I mean, the fire closing Carleton as opposed to the school board in this case, but if you're seeing impacts in the first 3 weeks that might be causing families distress.
I think the whole experience, I mean, the Carleton experience has been one of extraordinary achievement by teachers and students in the face of extraordinary challenges. Right? In 2008, the outbuilding damaged in a fire set by arsonists who weren't found. The provincial government wouldn't rebuild the building. The community, the council, the school board, Green Thumb Theatre worked together, and we now have an incredible artistic center on that site with considerable resistance. The provincial government would only give money to tear down the building. In 2009, March, on the site of Carleton School, there was a tragic homicide that killed a man, Michael Nestoric, who was much loved in the community and was at that time without a home. He was homeless at the time. And that happened and was discovered just as children were going to school. In 2010, Carleton students faced down a closure situation. Took 6 months. 900 people at the first meeting, 600 people at the second meeting, but it profoundly stressed the school community. As a direct result of that, there was some declining enrollment as a direct result of that. In 2016, of course, another closure announcement, and then the fire. Right? Breaking up communities. The school community was moved to Cunningham, which is the 6th closest school to Carleton. Right? And less than half of that community is gone. About 130 of the 290 students went to Cunningham, and 6 other schools have taken the rest of the students. So you're seeing this school community that was tight, teachers who had worked with each other for decades. There was a teacher in the frame building at Carleton who taught in the same classroom for 28 years and was loved. And her classroom was moved into the brick building just before it caught fire in June and lost all 30 years of teaching materials. For teachers, for students, for parents, it has been devastating. And so having to go through these processes in that context, when ordinarily an insurer would just fix the school, is very difficult for the community, very difficult for the students, very difficult for everybody. Carleton School is the reason there is a South Vancouver. It wasn't Vancouver when Carleton School started, it was South Vancouver. And, you know, we'd like to think that it'll be there for generations to come.
That's hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer. And maybe just one quick question for you, Mr. Dixon. That is, in terms of the numbers that are available, obviously here at the City of Vancouver, we have our analysis going forward of the potential development and population that stem from that. Do you know if the Ministry of Education in Victoria generates their own numbers or contracts analysis of population growth in Vancouver, school-age population, or do they have their own data that they're relying upon here?
Well, the Vancouver School Board has its data, and I'll just read you their process. VSP staff meet quarterly with the City of Vancouver to share information on major planning initiatives and to discuss the status of local area planning programs. VSP staff have been monitoring the Joyce-Collingwood Station Precinct Plan and developments in the Bruce-Collingwood Annex catchment. The City of Vancouver also provides development information to VS planning staff, etc. It has been determined that any VSB enrollment increase from local development projects can be addressed within the consolidated Bruce-Collingwood Granville catchment through available capacity. Available capacity, if Bruce were closed, would be 712. There are 780 children going to those schools today. And we're suggesting, and I think the evidence is suggesting, when you add, 4,000 homes or whatever the number is, 2,600 plus the 1,000 at Well Center, that there'll be more children. And that is not reflected. It shows consolidated enrollment dropping from 2017 to 2026. So what they're saying is, well, city may be saying there's more children coming. We're saying they're not, and we're using that as a basis to close the school. And I understand, by the way, in fairness to them, that they're not doing it because they want to, but they're under instructions, and you dealt with those issues earlier today.
Okay, appreciate that.
Thank you
for being here tonight. And we're on to the next speaker is Ron Bruce, and he's followed by Denise Brooks. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. I suppose I just got 5 minutes. Is that it?
Yep,
Okay.
that's correct.
My name is Ron Bruce. I'm not directly related with Graham Bruce, unless his ancestors were here 70 years before Confederation like mine. But first I'd like to acknowledge, like Elizabeth Mace always does, before she speaks, acknowledge being on the lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I was told that I had to make comments and you wouldn't answer questions, so I will try to maneuver around, make some comments here, and then you can maybe ask me any questions that you do have. So I live in the area of Joyce-Collingwood station, so I got this little postcard like thousands of other people did. So I thought I would come down and speak to the issue about expansion of the Joyce-Collingwood station. And so first, as a resident, but I'm not a property investor. I'm not a lawyer representing any investor. I'm not a real estate agent representing foreign or local investors. And as Adrian pointed out, I didn't know, I'm not an arsonist neither. And with the recent article about these unscrupulous property investors harassing elderly people in the West End, I thought this could be more of the same. You probably know more of that than I do. I'm glad that this group is here this evening, unanticipated. Remember reading a recent article dated June the 25th, 2014. Vancouver City Council has unanimously voted to acknowledge that the city is unceded Aboriginal territory. That piqued my interest. As you pointed out, Mr. Robertson, year of reconciliation last summer in the hopes of building new relationships between Aboriginal and Vancouverites. Underlying all this truth spoken during the year of reconciliation is the truth that the modern city of Vancouver was founded on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and that these territories were never ceded through treaty, war, or surrender. And that was part of the motion, carried unanimously. I don't have any authority to speak about First Nations or given any authority by First Nations. But in reference to all these sort of planning activities that go on, and maybe you can answer the question, I don't see them being consulted. And therefore, as a citizen that's respectful of the First Nations, I oppose, on the basis that they're not being consulted, any further rezoning of the Joyce-Collingwood station, and it really begs the question whether we had the authority in the first place. I concede my time.
Thanks for coming this evening. I appreciate your comments. And no questions from council. Thanks for coming, though. Our next registered speaker is Denise Brooks. Sure. Yeah. And she's followed by James Balanoff. Welcome.
Hi. All right, start. So I'm here tonight to speak against the approval of the rezoning plan until we have an appropriate train noise remediation plan in place to protect existing residents of Joyce-Collingwood. I am a Joyce-Collingwood resident, and I'm a huge public transit fan. I haven't owned a car in years and years. I only use public transit. I chose to live in Joyce-Collingwood because it's a fantastic transit hub. My daughter gets to UBC on the 41 to 43, and now she and I are both commuting to work with her co-op, and I work downtown at BC Cancer. And we love it, and we love living there. But there is a serious problem with the SkyTrain noise pollution. I've already given evidence to council about the 85 decibel spikes that are being generated in my neighborhood by the SkyTrain. In case you don't know about decibel, that's like, in this case, it's like a garbage disposal going off next to your head. And we're living with this day in and day out. Now, I realize that our current regulations are old and that we're going to be reviewing them. And I was, I'm very excited about those World Health Organization guidelines. I went and read up about them, and I was surprised to learn something. I mean, as a cancer researcher, I already knew that excessive noise, noise pollution can contribute to health problems, it's particularly cancer. But they also, something I didn't know, and which really disturbed me and that sort of brought me here tonight, is the way it affects children. And Joyce-Collingwood has a lot of kids. We have the most kids of any precinct in Vancouver per capita, right, proportionally. And it causes cognitive disabilities and developmental delays in children that have a huge social impact that can, affect the, the support and the services and even their, subsequent productivity in their lives. So the World Health Organization has published their study detailing this. They've published their methodology. They've used it to estimate that over 1 million years of healthy life are lost by Western Europeans every year just from traffic noise. We could use that methodology, and we could actually calculate how many children and how many people we have probably harmed through our outdated noise regulations that they've been in place since the 1980s. And living in Joyce-Collingwood, I can see that there is no remediation for our existing high-rises up for train noise. Obviously, our existing high-rises were not built with updated guidelines to address being so close to the train, but also the train hasn't had any appropriate remediation on the south side where the existing high-rises are. There's some small remediation on the north side where older homes were in the 1980s, but that's it. And I don't understand why there hasn't been additional noise remediation put in place when these subsequent high-rises were approved by the city. It seems like that would have been a moral responsibility, honestly, because we did know that noise is affecting people's health. And this wasn't done, and it's not in the plan now. And I don't understand how that can be possible. The only thing we have in our plan now is possible, it's not promised, review that might possibly make give the new residents living in Joyce-Collingwood a better quality of life, which is great for those new residents. But we have existing kids and existing people that are really affected and in a significant way. So that's why my concern. I'm hoping that the council will update that section on livability to state that they will implement guidelines and what those guidelines are going to be and what we can expect to see happen and how. Before we were expected to approve longer trains and more ridership, which I totally am in favor of, but I can't imagine what it's going to mean to the kids already there. So thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, you have questions from Councillor Jang.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I forgot to thank everybody. I've already written to the council about the problem and my particular little problem, but now that I understood, and I wanted to thank you for your very kind responses to my email. You've been very supportive, and I felt empowered to be here today. Like no good deed goes unpunished, right?
Oh, right on. That's good. Well, it's good to meet you. I know you and I have had several conversations by email, and We even do same research, more or less, in our different departments.
Done.
So I know that some of our staff are supposed to get back to you. I know they hadn't got back to you yet.
Right.
And so for the benefit of our staff here, Heather Burpee, who's one of our acoustical engineers, is looking into it. But I haven't heard anything back from her yet. But certainly, so as I understand it now, because you're there, I think when we talked about this, so we hired BKL acoustical consultants to look at performance standards in new buildings. But then there's all the old buildings that have been around for a while, and the switching mechanisms makes that sound.
Pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah,
And
my
so,
building's only 10 years old, but it was built directly across from that switch.
okay. So what you're looking for very specifically is noise mitigation processes or things that we can do for the older buildings that doesn't have the same kind of noise mediation, noise dampening
Right,
stuff. Okay.
right, but yeah, it'd be good to know in general, because I'm not an acoustical engineer, what is the noise load at Joyce-Collingwood right now? And how will the longer trains affect it in general, not just at the switch? Because according to the guidelines that were published in the guidelines that I read, the noise levels that they're talking about are really quite low of what they're recommending. So I think we'll be in trouble if we don't trying to address those particular guidelines.
Well, our staff are sitting here, and I'm looking at them, and they're looking at me and writing things down and nodding their heads. So at the end, I'll kindly suggest to them that we look at noise mitigation for the existing buildings.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Good to
Thank
meet
you
you.
for all your help.
Okay, that's your questions. Thanks very much for being here tonight. And our third next speaker is James Balanoff, followed by Roman Lizigor.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I don't intend to offend anybody by my verbatim, but after 34 3/4 years on the waterfront, you get to make production one way or the other. I find the area possesses an anthill effect. And my predecessors have mentioned different types of pollution, such as noise and traffic. I didn't hear them mention electrical pollution, and I think that's called smog. I don't see where multiplying the population in the area is solving the problem. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks very much for coming to speak. And our last registered speaker is Roman Lizigor. And I'll call, see if there's any more speakers here. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Roman Lizigor. Thanks for allowing me a chance to speak. I'm here to speak in support of the proposed rezoning. So I've been living in Greater Vancouver for about 20 years, in the city of Vancouver for more than 10. During this time, I've seen the prices of real estate double and then double again. And recently rents have started catching up very quickly. So I think Vancouver needs more housing, almost of every type, in most neighborhoods, and especially around transit. So it's true that lack of supply is not the only problem we have. There's the money laundering, the realtor misconduct, shadow flipping, vacant homes, Airbnb, foreign investment, et cetera, et cetera. All of these absolutely need to be looked at. But at the end of the day, and in the long term, we still need enough housing and the correct types of housing for those who want to live here. Vancouver has almost no undeveloped land remaining, so the only possible way to accommodate new people is to increase density somewhere. That's not just purely my opinion, it's kind of a matter of physics. There's some zone capacity in the city already, but it's not enough. Half of the new units each year come from additional rezonings. In addition, much of the existing capacity is downtown or along arterials or in commercial areas where new development will be expensive and not friendly for families. But I'm sure you know this already. So for those reasons, I think this particular rezoning of single-family homes is an especially good candidate. I think that's a great opportunity to build some family-friendly units that's missing from the city, townhouses, row houses, and small apartment buildings. The land prices in this area are not as high as in other areas, which means that this new housing is more likely to be approachable for middle-income families in Vancouver. There are obviously a lot of concerns, as many Vancouverites have expressed. Will the street grid support traffic? Will the SkyTrain station be able to support the additional people? Will there be enough place in the classrooms, especially with the school closures being proposed? I think these are all very valid concerns, but I don't think we should let fear of these concerns paralyze us. I think rather than opposing change, we should work together and guide it in the right direction. The best way to resolve these concerns, I think, is to work with the city, council, and the province to improve transit and to ensure that the schools are properly funded. One major issue that I would like to call out specifically, though, is the issue of tenant displacement. I do think this is a real concern both for residential and for commercial areas in this area. So while I support this rezoning as well as the area plan that this is part of, I would like to urge council to come up with some mitigation strategy for this. I know there's a tenant displacement policy in place for purpose-built buildings, but as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in place for secondary units, which are, as far as I know, basically half of the rental market. And with this particular rezoning, that's what most of the rental units that would be affected are, as far as if I understand correctly. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks very much for coming to speak. No questions for you. And we will now see if there's any more folks here who would like to speak on item number 3. Are there any more speakers for item number 3? Sure, yeah. Just give us your name for the public record, please.
Sure. My name is Max Madrusan, M-A-X-M-A-D-R-U-S-S-A-N. I had not prepared anything. I had not really planned to be here. My family moved on Wellington Street in 1967. My mother still lives there. It is and was a wonderful neighborhood. We used to play kick the can when I was a kid. I went to Sir Wilfrid Grenfell Elementary School. We went to St. Mary's Catholic Church. I graduated from Windermere Secondary School, and so did my sisters. We loved that neighborhood, but it's outpriced itself. It's gotten to a point where families can't afford to live there anymore. The land is a very, very valuable commodity. And I think this rezoning is a wonderful idea. My mother still lives in the house. We still have Sunday night dinners with her. We were a family of 5. We are a family of 30. So you understand how much we've grown. My mother knows all the neighbors in her area. She still has the same neighbor that she had in 1967 still living next door to her. They take care of each other. They're both widows. It is a wonderful place to raise children. Unfortunately, there aren't that many children anymore because of the price of the housing. So this is really a great idea. The unfortunate thing, the only thing I can recommend is that you didn't go far enough. I really believe you should have expanded the zoning, and maybe that will come with time. That's okay. But other than that, you know what? Bring the kids back in there. Bring the families back in there. That's what we need. We need more kids. And for the first time ever, I will publicly say I agree with Adrian Dix. So there you go. That's all I have to say. If there's any questions.
Okay. Thanks very much.
See?
Thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for stepping up to speak. Are there any more speakers for this item, please?
Forget how you start. Do I push something?
No, you're good to go.
All right.
Welcome.
My name is Marilyn Hogan. I'm a member of a group called Residents for Community Control on City Development. Thank you for having me, Mayor and Council. I appreciate it very much. First of all, I'd actually like to thank Councillor Reimer for contacting me about to request some input from me on the Grandview Woodlands Community Plan, and I'm really sorry I gave you a very abbreviated response because I was rushing to the airport that day to go to family function, and I barely made it. So anyway, I appreciate, though, that you took that time to contact me directly. So I have some concerns about this. I know that it's a fairly comprehensive report that was submitted, and in that respect, that's good. Despite what some people might think, I'm not opposed to all development or densification. What I am concerned about is irresponsible development and densification, and that's where we appeal to you to take certain things into account so that developers and builders are required to respect the community needs in terms of not putting excessive drain on resources that are already being quite drained. I'm a transit user. In fact, I would like to echo that I really am concerned about adequate funding for schools. I'm concerned about noise. I share these concerns. And as far as the transit goes, a few weeks ago, I was sitting right near Joyce and Kingsway waiting for the bus, and this was during rush hour traffic, and there was no bus for a good 35 minutes, and I gave up and went somewhere else, and so did other people. So that's the situation we have now. So with extra people coming into the neighborhood, with more buildings, there's going to be that much more of a drain on that kind of resource. And also other community amenities like community centers, swimming pools are packed to the gills like Charlie the Star-Kissed tuna, and that will only get worse. But one thing you can do is require that developers provide parking within their buildings so there's less demand for parking. Require that they provide pools and facilities within their buildings, and also provide more funding so that more community centers can be put into key areas where we are getting more people. So I'm not sure, I don't want to actually presume to know how you should deal with the transit issue, but I expect that council should sit down and hammer that kind of thing out so that we have more resources for the people who are going to be there. The other concern I have, one other concern, is on process. And I really have an issue with the idea of streamlining the development application process. And this was something that was put forth in the area that I live in, pretty close to Joyce, which is Norquay. And in this so-called streamlining, I mean, it sounds good, but it's really streamlining the application for the developer and not streamlining it for the people who have to live with the results. It's not really streamlining what we are able to do in terms of being able to easily access the information about what is being built or proposed and our opportunities for input. So like I have found with this streamlining in Norquay, I have communicated to council on a couple of developments that I had concerns with. One was they wanted to put up something that basically looked like a fortress with a big gate that was completely out of keeping with the character of the neighborhood on a street that had basically just shrubs and bushes and hedges and mature trees, and then this thing would be sticking out. But I had to seek that information. There wasn't an open house because it was in the confines of the redevelopment, the rezoning, and I had to take the initiative to write a letter. And if I hadn't known about that, I wouldn't have easily had that opportunity to provide any kind of feedback about that. So
You're
that's
just
where
about
I
at your
have
5 minutes.
an issue with
You can wrap.
streamlining, and I hope you'll think about those things. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for stepping up to speak.
Thank you very much.
Are there any more speakers for item number 3? Do we have any more hands raised over here? This is probably final speaker.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
My name is Jasvinder Randhawa, and I lived in this neighborhood last 10 years. Then I'm only concerned, like I think they have with the Wall Center development, there's quite a few new units, maybe 14 or something. Or with this development, they don't have many places to go for a like neighborhood grocery, to buying the grocery. And there's not many places, like they need more places. And another concern is like they need more like playgrounds in the area, small scale, like for the kids. That's all actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here to speak. Are there any more speakers for item number 3, last call? Okay, we're all done with the speakers list then. And as a few public comments were received after 5 p.m., I'll suggest we close receipt of public comments and move on to hearing closing comments from staff.
Just wanted to address the issue of noise from the SkyTrain. We did hear throughout the consultation of the JC precinct plan concerns around noise. And as I mentioned, staff are working on improving our existing standards around SkyTrain noise as well as traffic noise. And this work has actually been extended citywide. And as mentioned, we expect to bring recommendations to council early in the new year.
Okay, so questions for staff. Councillor Reimer?
Yes, I had a few. Starting with population projections related to, well, I know that the speaker who came specifically on that was speaking to the plan. As we're at public hearing, I would, of course, only be concerned with the RM7AN and RM9BN zones. But if you could give me some sense of of the 2,300 units that were projected in the total plan, how many units this represents, and if you have some sense of population projection.
Hello, Anne McLean, Urban Design. Based on the 25-year scope of the plan, the areas for RM7 and RM9 are relatively small in the overall. So in terms of overall units, we're probably only looking at an additional 125, 130 in the first 25 years.
Wow. Okay. But it's to say then that the other 2,200, 2,150 are intended for the rezoning policy sites.
That's correct. So there are a number of larger sites, some taller mid-rises, and buildings along Joyce Street itself that will accommodate significantly more units.
And is it fair to say that in the planning process, planners would model out what the population expectations would be of different built forms such as these?
Not entirely sure I understand your question.
Okay, let me put it in another way, and maybe it will make more sense. I apologize. It's that summer break. It was all so clear in July. Okay, so if you have a house, a single family home that may have empty nesters, which I'm guessing is a somewhat predominant characteristic in that area, do you look at what population is there, and then based on what typology you're putting in, what you would expect to see in population?
So in my 125 number I gave you, that's in addition to the 116 units that are, or the lots that are already existing, and assuming at least 1 unit per.
Okay.
So does that answer?
Yeah, no, that helps a lot actually. And then you might look at whether they would have seniors or families, because you have to also come up with the public benefit strategy that tries to match it.
There is a more in-depth study that would look at the population projection, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of demographics. Thank you.
Okay, and when you say that it would look, you mean that it has looked?
You know what, I could probably, Joyce may be able to answer this question a little better. I look at the built urban form, and so I've been looking at numbers of units, less so at demographic type information, but I would say yes, it does look at that.
Okay, I think legally at public hearing, all I can do is satisfy myself that it has been looked at rather than interrogate you about the actual answers to the demographics, because of course we're supposed to be looking at built form and those things, but I may follow up offline on.
Absolutely, you are.
Okay. The only other question I had was actually for the clerk, Mayor Robertson. In the correspondence summary that was read out differs from that which exists on the website. So I just wanted to make sure that they were the same. It's one-off, but I know these legal things can get they can cost a lot of money to sort out. Sure.
Okay, she can work on that. Did you have more questions? We'll go to Councillor Meggs. Questions for staff?
Mine have to do with population looked at from the other side. I mean, we heard tonight that their quarterly meetings with the school board and the findings are communicated to the school staff, but do you make inquiries about school capacity before you get engaged in the broader planning? Presumably, we're assuming schools will be present, and just as we would assume that the SkyTrain will continue to run, that kind of thing.
As part of the plan development work, we did liaise with staff from the Vancouver School Board, and within the plan there is a statement that as of September 2015, the local schools in the area are under capacity or under enrollment. We have also sent them our detailed projections based on the consistent with the numbers laid out in the report. So they have all our research.
If they were saying, be careful, we might close this school, that would have an impact on your planning recommendations, I assume.
I think the timing of the announcements this planning work has been going on for a couple of years. There's some macro level planning considerations that we take into account across the city. For example, this is a key SkyTrain station with some potential, as some of the speakers spoke to have individuals given the ability to live in an area right close to transit. I found some of the comments very interesting about it's almost chicken and egg with schools. This is creating opportunities for new families to come to the area. Certainly if the school's closed and we're missing, the chicken and egg comes in there, because then it would discourage families from coming. So it would be very unfortunate to lose the schools, but the plan for the Joyce-Collingwood area was intended to revitalize this area, give people opportunity to live near transit and have families in the area, more families in the area.
And isn't it true, Mr. Monroe, I think of East Fraser Lands and elsewhere, that to beat your chicken and egg thing to death, I mean, the province insists on lots of chicks before they allow the egg to be built. I mean, they require the enrollment to be present before they invest the capital. And that's been a constraint that we've seen in East Fraser Lands and elsewhere in terms of attracting the families that we expected to move there, given the amenities that were in place. Is that a fair comment?
I think it is. It's an ongoing challenge that we see the population, the enrollments, the new students coming, they look at it a little bit differently.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Meggs. Maybe I'll give the clerk an opportunity to update us on Councillor Reimer's inquiry.
Yeah, one more piece had been received after I read out the totals. So the final totals up to right now are 5 pieces of correspondence and support, 10 opposed, and 1 in the other category. So 16 in total.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Carr is next. Questions for staff.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Really, this is a follow-up to the questioning that Councillor Reimer had started on, and that is to make sure I'm perfectly clear about the specific rezoning changes that we are voting on tonight versus what is in the plan that will come later in terms of rezoning applications. So in terms of the current rezoning, the list is obviously in section B. of the recommendations. Is that correct? So creating new districts, RM7AN, RM9BN, et cetera, right? Those? Okay. And can you just describe very briefly, these are the town home, the row house, is that, and the 4 stories, what's the maximum height of the rezoning, that these particular rezonings would allow?
I just wanted to maybe suggest that we look at slides 5 in the presentation. There's a map there that shows the subject of the proposed zoning amendments, and those are the 115 properties that would be affected by the city-initiated rezoning. And it is a portion of the overall Joyce-Collingwood precinct plan. So the subject of tonight's rezoning, to reiterate, is the city-initiated rezonings of these approximately 115 properties from existing single-family zoning to duplex, townhouse, and apartment zoning. And for specifics, I'll refer to Ms. McLean.
And apartments up to 6 stories?
4 stories.
4 stories.
Yeah.
And that was a change. It was 6 and it's come down to 4. No, there's something in the report that talks about a reduction from 6 stories to 4 stories in response to public input.
And we did have 3 options that went out through the consultation process. And there were areas that, and this may have been one of them actually along Payne Street, where we had initially proposed 6 stories and then reduced it to 4 stories. But that had already been, that was part of the plan that came to council in June already.
Right. And these are areas that have older homes in them, most of them multifamily, subdivided, multi-generational. I mean, we've had descriptions from speakers about the multi-generational use of these older homes. Would that be fair to say that these are typically the kinds of homes in these zoned areas?
They're not, I mean, I guess they are older. They're not particularly old. I guess the majority of the houses there are sort of 50s to 80s as opposed to 1910, 1920.
Sure, understood.
And certainly there are some suites that would be part of the home. Other than that, I don't know, how broken up they are.
And again, would you please reiterate the estimated population that would be in this area? I know Councillor Reimer asked this, but I sort of went by without me noting it down.
So population and units, I guess, are 2 different things.
Right.
So in this area, the population within the plan, the number of residents would be 2,100 new residents. But that's different than the number of units. So
that's the whole plan, isn't it?
Yes, in the whole plan.
Right.
And then when I spoke specifically to these areas, I was talking about the number of units.
Yes.
So an additional approximate 125 units in the 25-year plan.
Right. And there will always be an opportunity for citizens to input on the other zoning rezone sites, including ones that are listed on page 9. Yes, page 9 of the report, including the towers being planned for the station area itself, the St. Mary's site.
Absolutely. So actually, even under the RM9 and RM7 zoning, any new development that's conditional, that is, it's not a single family house or a duplex, a larger building, a townhouse, an apartment, it will still be available for public comment through the development permit process. And yes, you're correct, of course, for the future rezonings for the larger buildings and sites, those will go through a more robust rezoning and development permit process.
Thank you.
Okay, that looks like the end of questions for staff, and therefore we are at a point of needing next steps from council. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Reimer?
Okay, I will move the motion for the amendments contained in this rezoning. I would say that Joyce-Collingwood stands out as a neighborhood in Vancouver that is very rich in families. And I mean that in the way you might think, families with young children, but with also the multi-generational families. So maybe there are no young children, but I mean, we heard today from an adult child of a mother who still lives in the neighborhood, and just how strong those family connections are. And I think he summed it up very well, that there is an increasing challenge for those families to stay together, maybe not in the house, but in the neighborhood, because of the lack of affordable options for different stages of your life and needs. So I think that these amendments help support it. I do very much hear the issues as a recent new resident in Renfrew-Collingwood. I do hear the issues about traffic and SkyTrains, and it sounded like every evening and every morning for me in my commute, and I think we all share similar challenges. But to say that the more housing we can put there, the less distance people should have to go, because they are able to either stay in the community or, in the case of displaced residents, move back. There were a number of issues raised: education, transit, housing, protection for renters, that falls squarely and solely in the jurisdiction of the provincial government. So it's awesome that we're having this discussion with a provincial, not a representative of the governing party present, but a representative of the province, or an elected representative at the provincial level, because I think so often we feel such high levels of frustration about hearing our residents come and plead these cases, and feeling somewhat helpless other than through this mechanism, which is to provide new zoning that might be able to support and buffer a bit of the need, but knowing that over the long term, even over the medium term, our residents are stretched to the limit and really need the money and the funding back into education, back into transit, back into housing, and to live the kind of life that Max, I'm sorry, Max, I've forgotten your last name, but that he talks about historically being a very achievable, not dream, but just expectation in a community that worked hard to give to the city, and the city and the province were able to give back to them by providing those kinds of support. So I'm happy to support this moving forward. I will, as noted, be following up with staff on that document, the more detailed demographic analysis. So I'll send you an email as soon as we're done voting. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Reimer. Councillor Jang.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I too will be happily supporting this. I'm a resident of Renfrew-Collingwood, it's a little further west, Windermere as well, and I didn't tell my mother this, but I got kicked out for a little while too, but that's okay. I thank our MLA, Adrian Dix, for coming. I think it's very important how he discusses the interplay of planning and schools and all the puts and takes that we have to balance off in these rezonings. And I think at the end of the day, after all of what I've heard today, not only in council, but certainly here from amongst the residents, is that, this rezoning will bring in families, bring back the type of neighborhood that I grew up with, like with Max as well, and how important that is. And that it's unconscionable to be closing schools. And especially when the provincial government is bragging about this huge surplus they've got and they're closing schools, I just can't believe it. I mean, I think what also we haven't really touched on is that, we talk about 2 and 3 and family-based units as well. They'll bring in more families, but we also have to service all those families that are living in one-bedroom apartments. And they're just as important. And, being an East End boy myself, at the time it was always a bit of a struggle. And and when we went to school, it was important to have something close by to actually get there, because, between home and school sometimes there's a path that goes somewhere else. And certainly we saw this with the folks, kids at Britannia. You have to keep that school open because that's the only place they're going to go. They're not going to walk 3 blocks further or 10 blocks further or whatever the case may be, and we'll lose them. And the planning exercise is one to bring about, it's not about, how could I put it? It's all about people, really, and making sure they have the best opportunities to go forward. And I think we forget that sometimes when we talk about budgets and density and looks and all that. But at the end of the day, people need a place to live. People need to get the education they need. People need the amenities and the life you need. And I think that the rezoning plan presented by staff here will achieve that. And we've heard, broad support from the community. I know I live in the neighborhood currently. I hear lots about it. People talk about it all the time. And, the very fact that, there is so much quiet support, may not be here, but there's a lot of support for it. And I think, once again, Max, you summed it up very well. For someone who didn't prepare a speech, I think that was fabulous. It was just it's dead on. And, issues of noise and those types of little things now are really important. I live not far from the Renfrew station, and I hear that thing going off every single night, every whine, whiz, click, and buzz. And so we have to be working really hard with our TransLink partners to really upgrade those tracks or something to mitigate the noise. So it's not just about the new buildings, but it's about the folks who've been living there a long time. So happy to support this, and I want to thank staff for all your hard work on this, and look forward to things going forward. And thanks to all the residents who came out and the MLA. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jang. Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I too want to echo thanks to staff for preparation of the reports and answering the questions. We really appreciate the answers that you've provided. They're very helpful. And to everybody from the community who came out, not only this time, but in previous times, and some of you have come out consistently and show such a very keen interest in your neighborhood, and I really appreciate that. I think that I just want to remind people that we're coming to this particular set of decisions from a previous set of decisions, and that previous set of decisions had some very, in my mind, clear I took away some very clear points from that. One of those points was that the community was divided over the development that would ensue from this precinct plan, and that most of the support came from one group, the St. Mary's Parish community, and they have a vested interest in wanting to see their development go forward, and they've been very vocal. And the equally in numbers, other people who came forward had some real concerns in terms of the development, and in particular the scale and the pace of development, and the impact that would have on the neighborhood, and particularly the displacement of people who many expressed fear would not be able to afford to stay, to live within the neighborhood, and keep their families together in many multi-generational homes that might well get torn down. I also heard very clearly, and that was echoed tonight by MLA Adrian Dix, as well as others who spoke, the worry about, as we add people, are we paying attention to the necessary public services, especially schools, but not only schools, the capacity of the SkyTrain station and other public amenities that would go along with that population increase. Yet we're not dealing tonight with the complete rezoning that would increase the density to the amount of people that are being projected for this neighborhood. I absolutely share the concerns around making sure when we make decisions around rezoning, we're also considering the essential public services and the impacts on issues like congestion, on transit and transportation, and on quality of life and the livability of a neighborhood. So I very much share that. So for me, what I've try to focus on is what is it we're actually voting on, which I'm not sure is actually clear out there in the public, but we did clarify it tonight. We're voting on a very small portion of this whole plan in terms of the actual numbers of properties and what they'll be rezoned to. What's not included are the towers and the sort of sites with the higher density. And we've heard very clear controversy around those heights and that density. I mean, up to, what is it, 600 and, I've calculated it, it's 189.5 meters, 621 feet at the station height. A lot of development there at the St. Mary's Parish site. We're not, though, voting on that tonight. We're voting on a set of areas which as staff explained, would include row houses, townhouses, and apartments up to 4 stories. And I haven't heard people say they are against that kind of form of development. I've gone back and looked through my records, and that hasn't been, in my mind, the point of controversy in the lengthy discussions that we've had in this area. So I am going to support these rezonings. I am going to, and that's primarily because that scale of development is the minimal scale of development really in the whole plan. And if we are going to be looking at redevelopment in any part of the city, the scale of townhomes and row houses and lower rise apartment buildings is what I've heard more support from than not. But I am very much looking forward to the public input on rezonings as the different rezoning sites come before us at the council table, because I know I've heard concerns expressed, and I know also the important point here is to ensure that staff really engage the public in the preparation around those, the consideration of those other sites, because that point has been clearly made. We need to ensure more robust public involvement in the discussion of what kind of decisions will be made on those sites. So as I say, I will be supporting this particular set of changes in zoning being proposed tonight.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Carr. That's all the speakers from council on the queue. I'll just add my my voice's support. First, a big thanks to all the speakers who came tonight and those who sent in feedback on this and the work of staff. And I think lots of good comments made about the crucial community needs. As more people come, the housing's needed, but as was said by some good comments from council, obviously those public services school piece, there's a lot of work to do working with the school board and pushing back on the province's closure, and we have lots of work to do with the rezonings ahead and making sure they're supported. So, but appreciate the work done to get us to this point, and I think what's in front of us is should be well supported by council. So we'll move to a vote on the recommendations before council, as moved by Councillor Reimer. And we have all 9 votes in favor of the motion, moving the recommendations. So unanimous support here tonight on item 3, and we have concluded item number 3 and therefore this public hearing. So again, thanks to everyone who's here, made the time to be here tonight to speak to council or listen. We appreciate your involvement in all this, and stay tuned. There's more to come on all of these fronts. Thanks, and we need a motion to adjourn this public hearing. And a seconder, seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. This public hearing is adjourned.